Good morning, and thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about mastitis pathogens in southern Germany. Just to give you a little bit of a background to kind of put into perspective what southern Germany in this case is. So I'm talking about Bavaria. If you're looking at Germany right here, this is the state of Bavaria. We have about 1.2 million dairy cows down there. It's about roughly the equivalent of a quarter of all German dairy cows. In total, there's 1.2 million cows on 30,000 farms, but the farm size is really small, so on average, it's about 36 cows. And the main breed down there is fleck-free, so not the black and white ones, but this kind of breed, which is dual-purpose breed. Simmental, you might know it also under. Average milk production down there is about 7,800 kilograms, and our bulk tank is actually quite okay. Second best in Germany at just under 200,000 on average. The samples are from my association, which is the Bavarian Animal Health Services. We are a non-governmental, non-for-profit organization. And what we do is we do troubleshooting on farms. We get state funding or EU-level funding to help farmers and everybody who produces food through livestock, poultry, fish, and we also have a bee health services. But the bovine by far is the biggest, so we've got about 20 veterinarians, 22 field technicians going out on farm, and then of course we have a laboratory where we are analyzing the samples. So they call the farmers, just to give you an idea about what these samples that I'm going to present about are about, they call us when they have problems with udder health or milk quality. And what we do when we go on farm is we look at the entire farm. And so my technicians go out on farm, and not only do they look at the milking equipment and check whether that's actually working appropriately, we also take, because the herds are so small, quarter milk samples of the entire herd and look at what we actually find. And so what I'm presenting here are the numbers or the results of 1 year. And so what we have is we have the samples from those herd visits where the entire herd is tested, but also milk samples submitted by dairy farmers. So if they have a problem, they can send it to us as well, the samples. And how it works in Germany is they don't send only the infected quarter, they actually send all 4 quarters in most cases, so in, I would say 98.9% or something. When my technicians go on farm and submit the quarter milk samples, they also do a CMT test in the barn and record that one. And also the samples that are submitted by the farmers, we do look at them and do a CMT as well, if necessary, if the farmer didn't do it already, or we double check that the farmer actually knew what he was doing, she was doing. And so, and then, yeah, we do the classical aerobic culture with biochemical differentiation. And then for most of the gram-negatives, we also throw the isolates into a MALDI just to make our life a little bit easier. Mycoplasma is not in the standard protocol, part of it, it's not. But people request it, or we look for it, and we look for mycoplasma in the way of normal anaerobic culture, or we also have a PCR that also looks for Mycoplasma bovis specifically. All right, so what happened in 2017? So what happened last year? Almost 2,000 farms submitted samples to us. Which is equivalent of 405,047 quarter milk samples, which represent about 103,000 cows, of which most were actually visited or from farms that were visited by us. And so, yeah, we had about 1,800 farms that we visited, and we visit them sometimes several times, so before and after where samples are taken. And I did not fake this graphic. What we're seeing here is if I'm looking at all of the samples. This is the first column, and I'm looking at blue is no growth, and red is where we find something. So, and as you can see, overall of those 400,000 samples, in 18% we actually found something, and the majority we didn't find anything, so it's no growth. And then, as you can see here, with increasing severity, let's call it that way, of mastitis, we were more likely to find pathogens in the samples. And so from roughly 7% in the CMT negative ones to about almost 80% in the clinical cases. If I'm now looking at all of those samples, and here I'm trying to have most of the time the same colors in these graphs for the different bacteria. And one of the things that's quite striking is that the vast majority of isolates that we do actually find are CNS, followed by Staph aureus, Uberus, Dysgalactiae, and we have, I was surprised how much Agalactiae we still have in Bavaria when I moved there a year and a half ago. And E. coli, or the gram-negatives, are not overwhelming. They're very few and far between overall. If I'm looking, so if I'm splitting this now up, because like I said, we have two different kinds of populations here for the samples, then you can see this is the herd samples, where we assume the majority of animals are healthy, and voila, you see that most of the isolates here are CNS. We have a bunch of Staph aureus, some Uberus, Dysgalactiae, and then E. coli, again, yellow here. Very far and few between, but the top four are really CNS, aureus, Uberus, and Dysgalactiae. This changes slightly if you look at the colors. This changes slightly in regards between herds and individual cow submissions. Individual cow submissions here, what we see is it switches. CNS is still quite there, but Uberus takes a little bit more over, and Uberus and aureus trade places. And then you've got Dysgalactiae, and E. coli gets a little bit bigger bar over here. We're looking at the big ones here. And so one of the reasons there is because the clinical cases or the individual cows tend to be the clinical cases where farmers want to check out what's going on. And so one of the things that we see here, and you can see this, I mean, the majority of samples from herds, where we take the entire herd sampling, most of them are without CMT negative, and then you tape this down, and you can see we have a much higher proportion of subclinical and clinical mastitis in the cow individual samples. And so if I'm splitting up what I find in the bacteriological samples between or along the different steps from CMT negative to clinical, CMT negative, the CNS is the vast majority, almost half of them, it's 46%. Aureus is 25%, Uberus about only 8%, and here you don't even see E. coli on the list. So basically with increasing CMT, one of the things that you can see is, and I'm just going to go through the slides to give you an impression of what it is. You will see that CNS is decreasing, aureus is decreasing, and Uberus is increasing. So if you're looking at CMT2 now, CMT3, and so here you can see Uberus is definitely increasing much more, and CNS is almost disappearing. And so this is clinical cases, and you have suddenly 8% E. coli's, but really Uberus is the most predominant bacteria or isolate that we find associated with clinical cases. The gram-negatives are there, but not really that much of a problem. They're few and far between, and as you can see mycoplasma. We do screen for it on occasion, or we look for it on occasion, but it's basically lumped within the other. And I just did a study earlier this year where we went to 152 truly randomly selected herds all over Bavaria, and we did again whole herd testing, but also, and this is for cost reasons, we only sampled 15, up to 15 cows per farm with the PCR for M. bovis, and we didn't find it in any of them. So it's not really that big of a problem or prevalent in Bavaria, at least. So to summarize, we had, as you saw, an increasing likelihood to detect mastitis pathogens with an increasing CMT. We have definite differences in the distribution of the pathogens between herd testing and clinical cases. And while CNS is the most likely found pathogen, or not pathogen, bacteria in herd screening, Uberus is really the one that causes most of our clinical problems in Bavaria. So at this point, it's really the environmental mastitis pathogens, including the other ones, that dominate mastitis in Bavaria. And with that, I say arigato, thank you very much, and I'm happy to take questions.